Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Thaneshwar Bhusal. I'm an expert in the areas of participatory local governance, federalism, and similar issues in public governance. As you might have been aware of many of the things that we have been discussing for the last 2 or 3 series, this year's discussion point is on federalism in Asia. To speak broadly, we will be covering so many things within the flag of federalism, if you like it. So today we have an expert from Nepal, Dr. Jeevan Baniya, with whom we will be speaking for next 30 to 35 minutes. Dr. Baniya has an MA from GSIS, Azu University, South Korea, and a PhD in political science from the University of Oslo in Norway. He has been serving as a faculty member at Tribhuvan University in Nepal, where he teaches master's and PhD courses and supervises many of the students' dissertation work in the field of migration and governance. He has provided advisory and technical support to the Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security in Nepal. He also has some contribution on the issues of federalism and migration to different government entities, including National Reconstruction Authority in Nepal, National Human Rights Commission, the International Labour Organization in Nepal, just to give you some names about it. His academic interests include public policy, democracy and development, state-society relations, governance, labor and migration, disaster, gender and social inclusion, among several other things. You can find out his publications on the website of Social Science Baha, which is very much famous think tank organization in Nepal. I would encourage you to go through his web profile so that you can read his publications in detail. Dr. Baniya, first of all, I would like to welcome you to this conversation. This is, of course, a privilege to find out you as an expert to discuss about the issues of migration in federal settings. So without delaying, I would like to begin a very generic question about the interconnection as a field of subject study or as a field of study area. How would you like to interpret the interconnection between federalism and migration studies?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the conversation. I also would like to wish all the best for the forthcoming sessions that you are already planning. And I would also like to thank the team of HSF. So it's my pleasure to be the part of this conversation. Just to talk about the interface between the federalism and migration context here in Nepal. As you know, that the Nepal's governance system was sort of a unitary system before 2015, and then in 2015 we have a long history of what led to the 2015 situation when the new constitution was promulgated. But the basic idea was to provide service and when taking public institutions closer to the people, so that people will benefit from the service that are provided locally, and they would also be able to participate in many of the public policy makings, implementations, and its oversight as well. And they could also have the opportunity to make their representatives and leaders and officials accountable to the matters, to the issue about the issues that matter in their lives and their society. So after the 2017, as one can imagine, many of the structures, constitutional mandates, and the laws and policies have defined our governance system under the federal republican structure. So like many other aspects of the governance, labor migration has also been restructured in a way, and I think it is being restructured. I would say, I think that would be the right word, because as you know, still we have new institutions being instituted, and there are laws that have been amended in order to define new labor governance system. However, I think we should also acknowledge the fact that given the issue of labor migration being sort of international phenomenon, so mostly the labor migration is governed by the federal government. So in terms of making policies, and having bilateral agreements and things like that, these kind of powers is with the federal government. But at the same time, if you look at the policies, laws that are related to the labor migration, many aspects of labor migration governance has also been decentralized and devolved. For example, if you look at the Local Government Operational Act, that mandates local governments to collect data about migrants, returnees, employed, unemployed, and then the very act also mandates local governments to make policies which are related to the labor migrants and labor migrants or aspirant migrants. At the same time, if you look at the constitutional provisions, there are some shared power in which provincial governments and local governments are also supposed to formulate policies specifically related to skills, employment, integration, and things like that for the migrants and the returnees. So we can say that labor migration governance is being restructured. And there are a couple of other development after the constitution was promulgated, mainly with the law that was amended. Certain power has been delegated to the chief district office, so that office which did not have that power in the previously according to the Foreign Employment Act 2007, but with that new amendment, CDOs can investigate some of the cases, particularly those related to the individuals. Individuals means agents and other individuals rather than private recruitment agencies. So they can investigate, and in some cases they can also mediate the disputes and the conflicts between migrants and individuals. And that very amendments has also delegitimized the agents who used to be involved in facilitating migration of many of the Nepalese. So they've been I think declared as illegal to operate. So I think the legal and institutional instruments have been put in place. I think it will take some time for us to see the result because these are the recent developments. Having said that, I think there is a long way to go in terms of improving labor migration governance in Nepal, to which I think we can come back to in the later stages.
Sure, great. Thanks a lot for providing insights by taking a reference from Nepal about how the notion of federalism and the concept of the subject of migration governance is being restructured according to the structure that is outlined in the Constitution. That brings me to think of how compatible both of the issues can be or cannot be in terms of when it comes to implementing labor migration governance, particularly from the viewpoint of labor sending countries. So just to give you an additional insight on the categorization of labor migration governance studies in federal countries. So we can think of one aspect is as the viewpoint from the labor sending countries, in which, as you highlighted by taking a reference from Nepal, that many of the power and resources and perhaps other decision-making authority to lower level of governments, including in the provincial and also at the local. And there is also a provision of district administration office where some of the power has been delegated to them. This is all about how labor sending countries are, if they are federal, restructuring their federal labor migration governance. The other aspect of the same issue to look after, especially in the federal countries, is from the viewpoint of labor receiving countries. Of course, we have got less plausible or evidence to talk about how labor migration governance in those labor receiving countries has been operationalized or conceptualized or maybe we have less time now to talk about. But that's very insightful comments from your side, Dr. Baniya. Thank you very much for this particular thing. So you also touched upon some of the roles and responsibilities of different levels of government. And I was wondering to understand the degree to which provincial or state level governments can actually play in implementing this regime. And there definitely becomes an issue of intergovernmental relations when it comes to implementing the labor migration governance. So what would be your take in touching upon these intergovernmental relations while implementing the labor migration governance in labor sharing countries?
Yes, thank you very much, sir. I think you are quite experienced and you already have been through this experience. So I think that particular question also comes out of your experience. We have already been discussing about the lack of proper coordination among the government agencies, not only in the provincial and then federal and the local level, but even before we had the federal system of governance, we had that issue in the context of different ministries as well. We have Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security, we have development technicians, we have staff like labor attaché and things like that. And within the Ministry of Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security, we have the wing called Foreign Employment Board. So within these institutions, there were issues about a lack of proper coordinations in regards to both providing services to the aspirant migrant workers, migrants, and the returnees, as well as in terms of making policies and then having some let's say plans in terms of crisis like COVID and other contexts. So that's one thing. But in the context of the federalism, I think you rightly pointed out that still there are lack of clarities in terms of how these ministries at the federal level cooperate and work with the institutions that are instituted at the provincial level. We recently have labor offices there at the federal level that has to look after both foreign employment related issues as well as internal labor migration related issues. So and then these government agencies needs to, at least at the provincial level, if we are talking about skills, employment, awareness, skill certifications, recognitions, and things like that, they have to coordinate with other institutions. But based on my research, I think there is one lack of understanding and clarity about how things should be done. Second, I think there are also confusions about legal mandates among some of the institutions. And in the context of labor migration, I think there is less role of the provincial governments as of now. But if we believe that all level of governments have their own responsibilities to work for these issues, I think it's the provincial government that have to I think be quite serious, and then they have to also coordinate with Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Industries, and things like that. But that's not really happening. However, if you look at the policy and the plans of the provincial governments, and if you look at some of the documents, basically the periodic plans of Provincial Planning Commission, it's very, very encouraging, I would say, because they have included the policies to upskill the Nepali laborers, both with the view that maybe some of them could be tapped in here in Nepal, they could be utilized here in Nepal, or even if they want to migrate, they can benefit from that kind of opportunities. So that is encouraging, I would say. In the local level, as I mentioned earlier, especially with the situation of COVID, I would say, I had for a couple of studies gone through the policy and plans of some of the municipalities and rural municipalities of 4 provinces recently. And I try to look at to what extent or whether and how they are trying to prioritize the issue of labor migrants, skills, and awareness, reintegrations and things like that. They have mentioned it in their plans and policies. However, I think there are a couple of things that we need to highlight here. One, the local governments have a lot of things to do. So maybe they don't have institutional capacity, technical capacities, and things like that. Resources, we are always constrained by that. So that's how I think they haven't been able to work in this area as effectively as they would have wanted. But there is a increasing realizations that they need to just consider the importance of working in this area. So that's happening. But that being said, I would like to. I think this would be my recommendations also for our leaders and the people in the ministries and the decision-making level. I still think that in the context of federal Nepal, most of the services need to be devolved and decentralized. Services, many of the activities that Foreign Employment Board has been doing now can be done by the local governments, right? Maybe that kind of institutions can focus on making policy plans or providing technical support to the institutions and the governments at the local level. But many of the services that are tailored to the migrant workers and their family has to be devolved and decentralized. So that's not happening. And there are a couple of issues that I think we need to improve on. Recently, FEB's, Foreign Employment Board services has improved because of the use of technology. And I think you can also track their progress in that regard. But still, in regards to providing some of the services related to consular services, that has to be integrated to the MOLES or FEB, and then the insurance, I would say. We have decentralized all the services to the subnational level or the local level. However, for claiming their insurance, they have to travel all the way to Kathmandu, and then they have to go through the different routes. They have to go through different institutions. So that kind of services can be and should be improved. Last point, sir, on improving labor migration governance. We have been having this discussion for a long time, but somehow we have also made the progress in the information management system. So we do have Foreign Employment Information Management System that has to be strengthened, and the use of the data and information we have in that system need to be regularly updated and utilized in order to inform our policy and practice. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. That's quite insightful, of course. So when we talk about labor migration governance, 2 different dimensions pop up immediately into my mind, at least. I have no idea whether they are correct or we may correct them later. The first one is the regulatory aspect of labor migration, whose focus is to make sure that the migrant workers who would like to go to overseas for work are safe, dignified, and their choice to foreign employment is optional rather than obligatory. So this is the regulatory framework, I would say, under which the federal countries, not only Nepal, but also other countries in Asia, can think of how to regulate through different channels or layers or levels of the government within the federal context. The second dimension or element of the labor migration governance is the welfare aspect. So, even though the welfare state, of course, almost every country is now a welfare state, has to have some kind of responsibility to show or to provide to the families, to migrant workers themselves, and the communities that are impacted by the overall foreign employment regime. So, considering these two different dimensions, I think many of the federal countries in Asia have started thinking of, as you rightly pointed out before, devolving much of the power and resources to the lower level of governments, including provincial and federal and so forth. So, if we consider the recent or ongoing pandemic and its impact on labor migration governance, so what would be your take, Dr. Baniya, to talk about whether federal countries were better off in responding to the impact faced by our labor migrants, or non-federal or semi-federal countries were better off in doing so? Do you have any comparative idea to talk about the response of COVID-19 on labor migration governance in federal countries?
Thank you, sir. I think I don't have much evidence to just back my arguments, but I think I have to rely on some of the documents that I have reviewed when I refer to the comparative context. I think there are two issues that we have to account for. One, whether and how nation states or the federal or unilateral governments responded in the context of COVID or provided some kind of support in the destination country. That's one thing. So that includes diplomatic initiatives and initiatives for providing relief support to safe and dignified return, as you mentioned. That includes also the dead body of the stranded migrant workers. So, as you know, that many of our families were even deprived of the right to perform the final rituals of their family. But I think in those cases, rather than the migrant origin countries, it was rather the situation in the destination countries that had that kind of implications. I think rather than the form of the governance, I would argue that I think the bilateral relationship and the kind of political economy, the kind of strategic locations that we are situated in, that seem to determine many aspects of cooperation, no cooperation, and things like that from the destination country, basically. That's one thing. But when they return, I would say that in terms of providing support, being considerate about the issue of labor migrants and the returnees, their integrations in the society, I would say that federal governments would be more considerate because these are the people who will be voting for their local representatives. The member of parliament, be member of parliament, be mayor, vice mayor, or the member of the ward and things like that. So these, because they have to be accountable, the leaders have to be accountable. The political party leaders, be whether they are in the government or in the opposition, they have to be considerate about this issue. So there is some kind of pressure created in the society in order to help the migrants in these situations. So, but in the context like centralized governments, I think they would be quite strategically positioned in terms of repatriation, rescue, and things like that. But for taking immediate decisions to support migrant workers, I think the federal government, provincial and basically local governments would be quite appropriate. I think that the case of Kerala in India that illuminates this point. They have very proactive and very migrant workers and their family-centric policy and provisions. Even while the pandemic was panning out, they had already thought about how they could help their migrant workers and their family. But in terms of regulating labor migration, I think you rightly pointed out that the fact that especially in the case of Nepal, more than 90% of the labor migration from Nepal is facilitated by private recruitment agencies. And the fact that they are only centered around Kathmandu and few mega cities, let's say. It was quite challenging for us to even regulate and monitor their activities, including recruitment practices and things like that. I think in the context of COVID, I think this was something that received less priority. But in the COVID situations, at least after the recruitment of Nepali migrant workers started in Gulf and Malaysia, the situation is getting worse, I would say, because there are instances that migrant workers have to pay almost double the amount of what they used to pay before the COVID, because there is less demands from the destination countries, but there is more competition and there is less regulations about it. And at the same time, I think many of you are aware of the situations that they have been also forced to pay much more higher cost for their tickets and things like that. So I think it's quite pity situations that we have seen for the migrant workers.
Okay, so Dr. Baniya, you touched upon the notion of reintegration when we are talking about the response to COVID-19 during the last 1.5 years or so. I think the issue of reintegration also rightly fits into the institutional design of many of the federal countries. You're right that the federal or central governments have the responsibility to have some bilateral labor relations with labor receiving countries. Provincial governments may organize activities that are related to more or less skills or skill boosting or testing mechanisms, whereas the local governments are or have the responsibility to introduce relief packages to those who have been impacted by this notorious virus. The point here I would like to raise as a question to Dr. Baniya is how different types or different levels of government can work together to introduce measures to reintegrate the returnees into the national economic, social, or sometimes even individual notion of lifestyle. So what would be your take in terms of talking about reintegration policies in federal settings?
Thank you, sir. I think this is the talk of the town at the moment, the reintegration issue, as I think the current minister had also spoken about Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security coming up with the reintegration plan, which is something that I think we need to appreciate about. However, I think that it's too late. Returnees who had returned to Nepal, being impacted, having lost their jobs and incomes, being in the debt trap situation, they've already started remigrating because of the lack of opportunities and because of the lack of decent jobs and things like that. So I think it's too late, but I think at least there are things that are into considerations, and then why I'm positive about this is that that can set some kind of precedent for the future as well. So I think it will be a good departure in a way. I don't know whether and how the reintegration plan has been designed. I think you better know about it. I have been in discussions and interactions and things like that. However, I think that sometimes I feel quite awkward when I discuss about this reintegration plan and policies and things like that here in Nepal. I would say that we are yet not clear about reintegration where, reintegration of whom, reintegration of how. These three questions need to be I think, specified in our plan. How, and we are having this plan at the federal level. I have been emphasizing that maybe we have some idea, we have some vision, but these things need to be, I think, implemented again at the local level by the local institutions. I think that kind of institutional arrangement will be in place. However, these three things still, for me, are very important. Why I'm saying this is that we have to identify their skills. We have to identify which are the potential areas that they would like to integrate in, they could be integrated in. What kind of environments are necessary? If you just think about one job for 6 months or 2 months, will they be integrated? Will they not be thinking about their future? That's one thing. I think so. When we think about these reintegration policies, it has to be somewhat comprehensive. It has to be, I think, worked through different governments and different ministries. Also, I would say that we might have to coordinate with the Ministry of Industries, Commerce. We might have to coordinate with, let's say, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Tourism, and things like that. I think that kind of thinking needs to go into design. For me, I think I might be wrong, but for me, there is one question that we have to discuss further. For me, I think the migration could be one of the ways for integration. Migration of migrants, migration of returnees, or even migration of their family.
All right.
Because we can't expect that returnee individual or aspirant migrants to be in their locality and then be integrated in that locality, because they don't have opportunity right there. So they have to move. They have to move to the cities. They have to move to the industrial corridors where the opportunities are. So I think in that case, migration to the foreign countries, but for the better opportunities, could also be the part of the reintegration. So
okay, I got it, Dr. Baniya. That's very useful insight into how federal countries can think of reintegrating the returning migrants not only into their own domestic atmosphere, but also can think of reintegrating themselves outside where they were actually originated from. Thank you very much, Dr. Baniya. I think we talked upon many of the issues that were supposed to be covered today. I'm particularly thankful for your time and discussions on the issues. So I would like to repeat some of the things that we discussed today. The first thing is the notion of compatibility between the subject matter of labor governance with the issues or institutions and structures within the federal setting. Dr. Baniya gave some insights from the viewpoint of Nepal's experience of implementing federalism since 2015. Then we touched slightly upon the notion of regulation and welfare in terms of how not only federal countries but non-federal or similar to federal countries have been enjoying for last many years. And we also describe how different levels of governments can actually take different roles in terms of regulating or providing welfare services to migrant workers. Then we came to the issue of reintegration. I think that's quite interesting and useful phenomenon. As he pointed out, it's a single game in the town or single game in the stadium. So many of the people have started talking about reintegration regardless of the gravity of the problem that they have realized. So thanks a lot once again from my side, Dr. Baniya. I am particularly thankful to Hans Seidel Foundation for trusting me to moderate this discussion. I think we'll be talking more about labor migration governance in many federal countries, including Pakistan and other similar or semi-federal countries in other Asian countries. With those words, I would like to say goodbye to Dr. Baniya, and we look forward to remaining in touch with him. And we would like to encourage Dr. Baniya and his team to remain in contact with the Hans Seidel Foundation, who have been working a tremendous job in doing some research in the federalism studies. So with those words, I would like to say bye-bye to everybody.